My name's Abby Griffith. I'm the owner and founder at Clarity Fitness. And we are here today to talk about eating disorder informed support for loved ones that are going through recovery. I am in recovery as well. And so this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I'm really, really excited to hear Holly's brilliance around eating disorder support for friends and family and loved ones. It's a complicated topic, but there's a lot of really awesome resources that are out there to make it easier and more positive and supportive for people. So, really grateful that y'all are here. I'll be in the chat the whole time. If y'all have questions or anything that I can help navigate, I'm happy to do so. Otherwise, I'll flag Holly. And I believe that is it in terms of my announcements. And Holly, if you're good to go, I'll go ahead and pass the mic over to you.
My name is Holly Pudwill, and I am a registered dietitian. I specialize in eating disorder treatment and been working in the field honestly longer than I care to admit, but closing in on like 20 years. And similar to what Abby shared, I feel really passionately about this subject and, just uh, the more that loved ones know, the better informed we are, the better that we can help. And I love an interactive chat. So I think we wanted to maybe save time, but if something pops up as we're going through on something specific, feel free to jump in and we'll chat about it. So what we are intending to cover is just going over briefly some definitions. I always think it's important to define our terms in whatever we're talking about. Um, and then what are contributing factors? So I think a lot of times there are questions around where did this come from? How did this start? What is my role in it? So we'll touch on that. And then comorbidities and complications. This piece I think is significant to recognizing the importance of quality treatment, timely treatment, because eating disorders are incredibly complex and dangerous. And so we need to take them seriously. And then we'll talk about treatment. So what that should look like, what we're doing on this end as providers and things that, we're responsible for and what we're looking for, collaboration with you. And so your role as a supporter, right? How do you support your loved one through their recovery? And then time for questions. So hopefully you guys have good ones. Um, so we have eating disorders impact about 9% of the US population, and estimated 10,000 deaths annually from complications of eating disorders. Um, I will caveat that by saying I know of people specifically, individually, that have died from complications of their eating disorder, but it's not listed that way on their death certificate, so they are not counted. So the likelihood is that this number is actually much higher. It's just not counted that way. Even still, eating disorders are the second deadliest mental illness. It used to be the first. It's not because it went down, but because the opioid crisis that got worse and so surpassed it. So this is very serious and why recovery is so important. And I'm also very passionate about full recovery. We don't do half measures around here. So we want to make sure we have quality treatment and an informed community of support, which you're all going to be because you're here. So looking at some definitions, you guys may be familiar with these things, but binge eating disorder is actually the most common of all eating disorder diagnoses. And I think sometimes folks with other eating disorders will say that they've had a binge, but it's what we call a subjective binge because it felt out of control. It felt like a lot of food to them, but it doesn't meet this specific definition, this criteria of a binge, which is consuming in a 2 hour period more than a typical person would in similar circumstances. And that is accompanied by a loss of control and then followed by intense feelings of guilt and shame. So I always like to say Thanksgiving dinner, not a binge, right? Because most people are eating somewhat more than they typically would at a given meal. at that time, and it's not out of control, and it's not, hopefully we're not having guilt and shame afterwards. Um, so that is a binge. Um, with binge eating disorder, there are no compensatory behaviors following the binge. With, we see a little bit over on the screen with bulimia nervosa, it's the same binge eating episodes, right? But there is a compensatory behavior following it. That can be restriction, that can be self-induced vomiting, that can be exercise, that can be it's anything that is not allowing the body to keep and utilize the nutrients that are consumed. So that's those two related but different. And then in the middle, we have anorexia nervosa that is characterized by self-starvation and weight loss, resulting in low weight to compared to what is typical for the individual. I would like to really highlight that part because most of the most severe medical complications that we see in treatment are typically from folks who their medical providers would consider them at a normal or healthy weight. However, it is significantly low for them, and they have lost a significant amount of weight in a given time period. So it is absolutely irrelevant to me what any BMI chart says or other calculations of what a normal weight is. What I'm interested in is what is typical for this individual and how has that changed and in what time frame. Um, so we will see restricting behaviors with that, but we also can see binge eating and purging subtype with that. And all of that gets really confusing. And to be honest with you, where to plug somebody in under what label is not so much um, of primary importance to me, but just symptom disruption, which we'll talk about later. But just so you know, other eating disorder definitions, OSFED stands for other specified feeding and eating disorder. And so these are things that are not going to meet the specific criteria of frequency or severity of the other diagnoses. They put something in here called atypical anorexia. There's actually no functional difference between that in terms of behaviors or medical complications, risk to the individual. However, a lot of times folks with eating disorders, if they get that diagnosis, to them, it means that they're not that sick, they're not that bad, they don't need treatment, they're fine. And medically, that's just not true. So a lot of people, myself included, are very much advocating for that to just go away as a label because it's not meaningful in any way and actually causes harm. So if your loved one has happened to be given that diagnosis, just know that. Um, ARFID stands for avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. This is extreme picky eating that creates a persistent failure to meet nutritional needs. And there are a few different categories that are usually the motivator for this, but I'm not going to get into those specifics so you guys can see it. Um, and then just some other common eating disorders that we see. So now that we kind of know what we're talking about, we'll look at contributing factors. Um, Eating disorders are multifactorial, so there is no one thing that leads to the development of an eating disorder, right? It's going to be a combination of all of these factors that you see. So looking at some of the psychological factors, a loss of identity. So that could be somebody that spent the last 25 years and their primary role was as mom, and now the last of the kids has moved out. You guys are empty nesters. And so who am I when I'm not primarily playing the role of mom, right? That could be an example. Um, Underlying stress, that could be a variety of things. That could be a really positive thing, like I went away to college for the first time. That's a great thing. But change is stressful. Even good things can be stressful. And so we can see in those kinds of life changes, the eating disorder can kind of come about. Perceived loss of control, personality traits like leaning more towards rigidity, stubbornness, perfectionism, or folks more prone to compulsions, anxiety, high rejection sensitivity. We are all sensitive to rejection, but having that a higher sensitivity to that. And some of the behaviors are actually attention seeking. So any or multiple of those things can play in. In terms of the media, so thinking about how much time we spend on digital media. So in 2022, it was about 7 hours. And they estimated that by this year, we would hit close to 8 hours. So basically, we're spending the amount of time equivalent to a full-time job interacting with digital media. And while that does not necessarily cause the eating disorder, it certainly contributes to body dissatisfaction, this idea that our body is this like wild thing that we need to like tame and control and manage rather than know my body signals or something that I need to come alongside and learn to interpret and respond appropriately to. So the media is promoting those kinds of negative attitudes. So we really want to be mindful of what media are we consuming? What magazines do we subscribe to? Do people still do that? I don't know. Who are we following on social media? What shows are we watching? What books are we reading? All this kind of stuff because it does impact us. This is something that I stole from these folks down here because I think it's fabulous, but we give them all the credit. So up here, intuitive eating and positive self-image. That's where we all aspire to be, right? I'm responding to my body's cues, giving it what it needs, and feeling good about myself. Um, and it is not necessary that a person go through every one of these stages in order to end up here with a diagnosable eating disorder, right? Some people may say, oh, my friends are going on a diet before prom, so I'm going to go on a diet too. And they didn't even feel bad about their body. They'd never skipped anything or eaten in any sort of chaotic way. They started here, right? And then maybe that just goes really intensely to a severe place, becomes obsessive, right? So we can kind of skip around. But just recognizing that I've yet to meet the person, and in their assessment, how their eating disorder started was they woke up one day and they were here. I've yet to see it. So just know that it's kind of a continuum. And if we can catch stuff, in these middle stages before it gets there and correct, all the better. Okay. So comorbidities. Um, in the research, we see 55 to 97% of people diagnosed with an eating disorder also receive a diagnosis for at least one more psychiatric disorder. I've yet to meet the person that doesn't have one, so I don't know where the 55 came from, but from my experience, the 97 is far more accurate, which just means there's just more going on. And that's what we always talk about is the eating disorder is not really about the food. Um, but there's other things. It's present to manage other things. Um, so we see mood disorders, and you see some examples, anxiety disorders, um, post-traumatic stress disorder, and trauma. So 30% of individuals with an eating disorder have experienced sexual abuse at some time in their life. That is a very common overlap that folks are in treatment for an eating disorder and need to be part of their therapeutic process is working through that trauma. We also see substance use disorders, personality disorders, sexual dysfunction, non-suicidal self-injury. So that type of behavior is on the rise in recent years, and suicidal ideation. So this piece is a significant contributor to what makes eating disorders among the deadliest mental illnesses because it's the medical complications and the significant increase in suicidal ideation and attempts. So we need to be looking out for those things as well. So medical complications, a lot of times our doctors not through any fault of their own. They just haven't been exposed to eating disorder education. And are also folks that are working really hard to remedy that. So they may have had, one brief part of one lecture in all of med school that touched on eating disorders. So they're just not well versed in the signs. And some of these things seem rather benign, but are actually indicative of severe illness. So And these are things, usually when I'm doing assessments, folks are ticking off, good 50 to 75% of these things. So just being mindful that the eating disorder behaviors, while it is a mental illness, it impacts every single body system. And that's why you can see we're having complications across all body systems, because it's truly just affecting everything as the body is trying to slow down certain processes, shut off other ones altogether to conserve energy and preserve life. Okay. So in treatment, what do we expect from quality treatment? Um, we should have communication amongst your treatment team members, and your loved one does need to have a complete team. So that should consist of a therapist, a dietitian, and a physician. And then, not me because I stay out of it, between the therapist and the physician, if they recommend a psychiatrist and we need to bring on some medications, then they will join the team as well. Um, so we need to have all of those pieces. Again, it is a mental illness, so we have to have the therapist, but it does have medical complications, so we have to have the doctor on board to make sure that this individual is safe. And even though it's not about the food is very involved, so we need the dietitian to help dispel any of those eating disorder myths to make sure that the individual is completing the refeeding process safely and we're learning new habits that are optimal for long-term health, right? So it's not just we want to remove the eating disorder behaviors. I fully believe in we are going to establish behaviors that are optimal for long-term health and wellness too. Um, it is very important that family and loved ones are involved in treatment. So you guys already gold star. You could check that one off because you're here, which means you care and you're involved and you're learning, which is awesome. And so if your treatment team isn't involving you as a spouse or a parent or whatever, that should be, you should address that. Um, the team should be setting goals around disrupting the behaviors. Okay, so we do not make negotiations with the eating disorder. We do not tolerate the eating disorder lingering or, partial kind of stuff because we know that, the saying is give an inch, take a mile. I like to say with an eating disorder, if you give it a millimeter, it's going to take 100 miles, right? So we just cannot let it linger. We need to be disrupting those behaviors. Quality treatment also involves an ongoing assessment. So that means maybe an individual starts an outpatient and they're doing okay for a little bit, but then progress kind of stalls. And so the team gets together and recommends, okay, we need more support so that we can continue progress. Or maybe, medically safety is compromised over time and things worsen, then we need, to change our intervention. So we are practicing an ongoing assessment and changing our recommendations according to how things are going. And your treatment team should also be setting objective and measurable treatment goals, right? So I like to send my folks home. They have specific steps that they know. Okay, between now and when you see me next, these are the things we're doing. We're challenging this fear food 3 times. It's very specific, very measurable. So that the eating disorder likes to swim in ambiguity and take advantage of that. Oh, well, I thought it was just this. So we try to be very, very clear to avoid any of its little gamey nonsense. Um, okay. This is something that I kind of made up. So just know that this is not officially anything. But I think that it's just helpful to kind of have an idea around what to expect in treatment. Okay. So phase 1 is we are medically compromised, probably in like inpatient residential level of care. Medical team is taking point, right? And we're trying to make sure that we're improving the patient's safety. Now, what will improve their safety is nourishment. So the dietitian is working very closely with the physician at that time to make sure that we are moving the patient through refeeding, but we are tweaking the meal plan and everything according to their medical complications to safely move them through that. And once that is better, right? A lot of people will think like, okay, I can't tell you the amount of times I've heard people leave a medical hospital and then go to outpatient and be like, we're cool to check in once a week. No, right? So there needs to be a proper step down. If we have been that compromised that we had to be hospitalized, we need a more intensive level of care to continue moving through the refeeding process. So just because the most acute risk and complication has passed does not mean we are safe, certainly does not mean we are well or that we are recovered. So we're just moving into phase two, which, and then the dietitian kind of takes point there, and focusing on nutrition restoration and any needed weight restoration. Um, I might have something about this later. I forgot, but just in case I don't, a note on weight restoration. Historically, and there's a lot of research to back this up, we have set target weights too low. Okay. If your loved one is working with a dietitian or a medical provider who is willing to negotiate a target weight with them, I recommend that you change providers because it should not be a negotiation. It does not matter. I don't have a preference. It does not matter the eating disorder's preference. It doesn't matter your preference. It doesn't matter your loved one's preference. It matters what is the body telling us is normal and optimal for it. And that's what we're going by and nothing else. If we settle for too low, the risk of relapse is high. And anecdotally, I've seen that more times than I can count. And there's research backing it up. Treatment centers are waking up to this and adapting or adopting actual protocols to set target weights that take these things into account. Um, if you have questions or you are uncomfortable about the target weight or any of that, I would always, as a provider, I would always welcome that conversation. Please not in front of your loved one, right? Because if the eating disorder hears that you think that weight is too high, it's going to attach onto that. And now I'll think, okay, now I have an alliance to go against the recommendation of my team. And we do not want that. It's already hard enough for the individual to combat the eating disorder. So if we don't want the eating disorder to feel like it's got an alliance to go against. So just my little 2 cents on the weight goals. Then in phase three, we are in a weight maintenance phase. We're moving into a maintenance meal plan. The patient's able to identify functions of the eating disorder. We're moving into more just like myth busting nutrition education. Medical team is probably decreasing monitoring at that point. Um, and then phase four, the therapist is going to take the primary role and really start working on what is the underlying root of this? What did the eating disorder develop to cope with, right? Is it identity formation and just completing the process of adolescence and separating from your family of origin and knowing who you are, that kind of thing? Is there trauma that we need to heal and work through? Do I need coping skills for stress management, etc., right? Um, and then we move into the recovery phase, and treatment is going to continue. So we are defining recovery as being 1 year behavior free. Okay. And so then we kind of move into a relapse prevention phase. The individual is identifying what are things that are likely to bring up that urge to use my behaviors to pull those in for whatever functions it serves for them. And so if I can anticipate that, then I can prepare to implement my other strategies and tools and support that I've learned through my therapy process. So metabolic adaptation, recognizing that um, when we are going through healing, like when the body is healing from anything, right? Whether that's surgery, a burn, a wound, an illness, right? Energy and nutrient demands increase for healing. And that is the same thing that is true with this. So the caloric demand for some individuals can be very, very high. I have had patients that are eating more than their teenage sons. If you've ever had teenage brothers or been a teenage boy or know, you know what they eat, that is, and eating disorders compare to everybody, so that can be very unsettling for them. It is not helpful to say, well, she's eating more than me, that's way too much. Again, if you have those concerns, have that conversation privately with the team, not in front of the patient. And we can go over and explain all of this. But for you guys to know, that demand is typically very high. It is also temporary, right? Once the healing is complete, then we settle back to maintenance. That was in those phases that we just talked about. But understandably, it's a cruel irony of this that individuals that are afraid of food have these extremely high need for it in order to heal. So it's a very, very difficult process. And again, the need for the wraparound care, including you all. Um, it feels very out of control for these individuals a lot of times. And when the hunger cues resume, sometimes they kind of come back with a vengeance and they're very intense and or erratic. So they're not hungry at regular times, and that is very unsettling. Um, in addition to that, with their body changes, sometimes at first the where the body fat is coming back on, um, it's going to go in the middle. And that's usually where everybody hates it, right? And over time, when the body realizes, hey, this is for real, and I'm getting what I need consistently, it'll kind of settle and redistribute according to this person's genetics, right? We don't get to pick where it goes, but it's going to go based on your genetics. But that can be very uncomfortable. They're like, well, I'm getting a tummy and I don't want that, so I'm out. And that can be a very real thing, and it can be also exacerbated by some body image distortion. So they may experience it as worse than it actually. You're like, I don't see anything. But know that that can be a very real thing. Functions of the eating disorder, I am not going to read to you all, but just for you to be able to see, the eating disorder will serve many purposes, some including, but some not, to do with actually one's body. Okay. Um, but a lot of things that the eating disorder will do. And those are the things that it's not that we ignore these, right? We're not going to take the eating disorder away and then leave the person hanging with these needs. They're going to work with their team and have other ways to get those needs met that are not harmful to them. So that's the goal of more in that like phase 4 part with the therapist. All right, your role. These are some common phrases that you might hear. Many of you may have heard these before. I don't like this food, or I've never eaten that food, right? So things that they'll say to try to avoid a fear food. Um, Comparing to other people. So I don't need to be there in this group. I don't need to be in treatment. I'm not as bad as everyone else. I can do this on my own. I can fix this by myself. um Eating disorders, like other mental illness, tries to isolate the individual, so they're going to try to push you away, right? This has nothing to do with you, or lashing out at you. Knowing that that is the eating disorder trying to push you away, do your best, not take the bait, not escalate emotionally with them. Sometimes they're just say, I really having ambiguous feelings about giving this up. I don't know who I am without it. I don't know how I'm going to cope without it. It just feels way too scary. I'll feel like I'll be out of control. And so sometimes there's some ambiguity in that of, I know I need to, I know this isn't safe. I know it's taking up so much brain space and distressing me so much, but I'm also not totally ready to give it up. They may say, I feel triggered by X, Y, or Z. And I'm sure you've all heard that word now. It's everywhere in the lexicon in a way that it wasn't before, but being mindful of those things. And then not wanting to eat things that are not part of the meal plan, or insisting that certain things aren't part of the meal plan when maybe they are. So again, why I always encourage, if you're a parent, let's have you pop in at the end of sessions, make sure we're all on the same page, what the goals are, what the meal plan is. I like to have check-ins, include spouses, supporters, whoever, from time to time. I've had, family meetings with siblings before. So everybody knows, like, what are the actual limits on exercise? What is expected in the meal plan? So that when this individual is saying what that is, because you've heard it from the team. Um, Other things in terms of your role. So wanting to be consistent. So that's some of what I was talking about. If you have questions about recommendations or targets or goals or any of that, we want to answer those. I would love to engage you and make sure that you're comfortable and confident in the treatment plan, but making sure we're communicating that separately so that we're not undermining the team and kind of giving the eating disorder some ammunition. We want to encourage expression of feelings and practice our listening skills. If you're like, I've never been a good listener. Well, that may be a good reason. Part of one of these is getting your own support, right? So if you maybe are working with in your own therapy on how do I deal with this? Because it's a big stressor. And maybe part of that is how do I listen and how do I effectively express my feelings as well and lead by example. Um, Providing support and reinforcement. So maybe, okay, you've never eaten breakfast. Your team said you have to start eating breakfast. I'm going to sit down and eat breakfast with you every morning, right? And so instead of standing there not eating and looking at this person eating, where it's much harder for them that way. As much as possible, removing financial stress from the patient. We know that treatment is expensive, and oftentimes people will leave treatment early because of their concern about the financial strain on their family. So as much as we can remove that piece from them so that they can focus on the challenge of healing, the better. Absolutely avoiding any food, diet, weight talk. So if you are on a diet, again, maybe have a side convo with the dietitian of, is that diet even worth the paper it's written on? What would be helpful to meet your specific needs? And so we're not, exposing this person to things that are just, again, reinforcing the eating disorder beliefs. Um, Same thing goes for, extended family, other people in the home, and how can we balance that so that this person doesn't feel singled out, like everybody else gets to keep their things, but I'm being told those behaviors are disordered, but here, my family is doing them. Um, a huge one, do not engage in power struggles. I promise you, a power struggle with an eating disorder is not going to end well. It's really just not. Um, so I volunteer to be the bad guy as often as I can. So you could just blame stuff on me. Like, I'm just doing this because the dietitian told me to. Like, that's fine. I can handle it. I signed up for this job. Um, and so I'll say that we're not going to have a power struggle at the table. If there's a question, it defaults to, if it's a parent-child situation, it defaults to the parent, put it in the food log. I'll clarify when we meet next. So trying to eliminate any of that kind of food police stuff. Setting limits and boundaries, whatever that needs to be. Sometimes we'll have a treatment plan of if X, Y, or Z threshold isn't met or is crossed, then we're going to a higher level of care. Or, hey, I can talk about this much, but that's my limit, whatever you need. Um, Another huge one, acknowledging the behaviors and stating what you observe. So I could not tell you how many times I've heard, well, nobody said anything, so I thought I was fine, right? Meanwhile, the loved ones are over here saying, we were freaking out. We didn't know what this was. We didn't know what to do. A really good tactic is to say, hey, I'm really concerned. I noticed this. Is everything okay? What's going on? Right? Because you can't, it's not, I'm accusing you of doing something. You're just saying, this is what I noticed, right? And then asking questions and let them talk. But we want to put a light on the behaviors and acknowledge that they're there. Shared meals we've talked about, so eating together. So again, it's not you're the only one that has to eat, no one else is. We're all getting to restrict. Um, and not doing that around the TV, actual sit down at the table, engage with one another, connect. That connection is so powerful. And finding supportive alternatives to eating disorder behavior. So if, the goal is this individual would always go on a run after lunch or whatever, then what are some other activities we can plan together after lunch in place of that? And then 4 C's, honestly, I think they're good for life, but for meal support and just general staying calm, right? Nothing ever goes well when we escalate to match somebody who's escalated. That doesn't ever go well. So we stay calm. we stay confident. That's why you have to be involved in the treatment. So you know what the goals are, you know what the recommendations are. So you can confidently say, no, I heard the dietitian say that you are not supposed to run after lunch anymore. Right. So let's go, I don't know, let's go to the flea market or whatever we need to do. Um, we need to be consistent, right? So the expectations are consistent, consequences are consistent, etc. And we're doing all of those things with compassion, thinking about all the things that we've already talked about, the medical complications, how this person's feeling physically, comorbidities, where they're at in their headspace. We all know starved brains are not happy brains. Folks are not thinking clearly. If we've had arrested development because this started before our brains were fully developed, we also have an underdeveloped brain, right? So we would have a lot of compassion. This is very uncomfortable. This is very difficult. And our loved one is just not themselves while they're in the throes of it. This I said already, but make sure you have support for you. So knowing when, okay, I'm about to be reactive to this, maybe this pushed one of my buttons and now I'm reacting out of my own stuff, or I'm just plumb exhausted because eating disorders are intense and it gets exhausting. And know that you can only be responsible for your own feelings, right? So we're not going to try to do things to try to prevent our loved one from reacting a certain way or doing a certain thing. You can only control you. And they have to take responsibility for their healing, for their recovery, lean on their team to support them in how to do that. And not taking this personally, even if sometimes they lash out and tell you it's your fault. Because that's a quick way to then, okay, now I'm reacting, right? So having your own counseling, your own support, your own, whoever your support system can be. Recovery criteria we talked about. So no behaviors at a healthy weight for at least a year. For the ladies, we have regular normalized periods. We're able to eat without guilt as much as we need, a wide variety. We're responding to appetite cues, and we are accepting what is healthy. And that means what is healthy for this individual, not some other random weird definition from the internet. Okay. On the behavioral side, I know who I am and I feel good about that. I like that person. I'm okay. I know I'm going to have a wide range of feelings in any given day and I can manage that. I'm comfortable with that. I've allowed my body to mature completely and I'm taking steps age appropriately to uh, personal responsibility and adulting, all that good stuff. And some things may need to change, right? I might look different on the other side of recovery. There might be a change in, maybe I was always really passive and go with the flow, but that's actually because I was taking it all out internally with my eating disorder. And now guess what? I've got a voice and some opinions, right? So those interactions might look a little different on the other side. And I may have had to change some of the people I'm around. Maybe I had to change the small group I'm part of because everybody in there was living in diet land and that was too triggering, right? So all of those changes are often necessary parts of recovery. Super important to remember that full recovery is possible. I've seen it with my own eyes. I could not have stuck this out this long if I hadn't. Um, I personally do not believe in settling for less than that because if there's this much of the eating disorder left, something's going to happen. Life's going to happen. We're going to have a tough season in some way, and that thing is going to blow wide open and wreak havoc all over again. So we want to go for the full recovery. So, in summary, that was as fast as I could go, y'all. Um, Eating disorders are complex mental illnesses with extensive medical complications. Early diagnosis and intervention significantly impacts the likelihood of full and sustained recovery. Quality in treatment includes the multidisciplinary team. Um, and along with that early intervention, completion of the process. So early exiting of treatment, along with too low of a target weight. I would say those are the two greatest predictors of relapse that I have seen over and over and over again, and the research bears that out as well. Um, so all of that to encourage you guys whatever highest level of care is recommended as soon as possible, and then following step down all the way through. That leads to the best outcomes.